then the rain starts to blow on the road. So you come back from work on the road at night, it's raining, and then tomorrow morning on your way to work, you're like, who dug a hole in this road? Nobody dug a hole, it was just the rain finding its way and having its impact. Nobody dug a hole, it was just the rain finding its way and having its impact. So flooding is a common experience across the country, cities and villages, the problem of flooding. Now, another impact or another issue on climate change, issue of sea level rise. Nigeria sits on the coastline. We have about 853 kilometers of coastline in the country, covering about 9 or 10 states, and just by the Atlantic Ocean. So we know it's a challenge with sea level rise, with sea incursion, with storm surges. It's a problem. Lagos in particular, a city with close to 20 million people, with 6 million along the coast, living there, having the lively as well as informal settlements, in new settlements like the Eko and Plateau City. The problem of flooding and climate change at the coastline presents a huge problem, a huge scenario in that. For example, I shouldn't forget is that for Lagos, it's predicted by 2040 rise in the sea level, and that really is a big issue. Another thing is temperature, but before I go to temperature, I need to also underscore that for the whole of Nigeria, flooding is not always a challenge. We have parts where drought is a problem, particularly to the north, and that has led to crisis, some of the former herdsmen crisis we've had, because there is less vegetation for the cattle to feed on, the others, the nomadic others, and then they're moving down south where we don't have much problem of drought. In order to graze their cattle, and it causes problems. Temperature is a big thing because we're experiencing heat stress. We all know about the prediction of the 1.5 degree centigrade increase, and what that would mean for construction, what that would mean for health. But beyond just increasing temperature as a result of climate change, urban heat island, that's the increasing grey spaces as a result of physical development. It's a big factor in increasing temperature. In the cities or anywhere physical development is taking place. And this is related to increased morbidity, mortality, sicknesses like malaria, and some other that are carried by vectors like mosquitoes. This means adaptation is a big concern. Yes, mitigation is also an issue, but I think the focus for us as a developing country, considering the socio-economic context and the level of development, it's more about adaptation. How do we cope with these challenges? And this is, I wouldn't talk much theory and concepts here, but I find this very interesting, which covers the different aspects of adaptation. I know there are different definitions of adaptation as part of resilience, adaptation in itself in relation to agricultural systems, adaptation in itself in relation to agricultural systems, socio-ecological systems. But the aspects, the key aspect or any aspect of adaptation you might want to think of comes under this domain, which was presented in a Nature article published about 2 years ago. It talks about assets, resources, natural resources, financial resources, which people need to have, communities need to have in order to cope, in order to adapt to climate change impacts. And this was particularly suited to coastal communities in the tropics. You talk about flexibility. Flexibility considers the ease of changing from one condition to another, adjusting to the change, the ease with which you can, for example, change your livelihoods with a new species of fishes coming and another species going into extinction or declining, the ease with which you can switch from one approach to another. And then you find organization, which deals with the network, the social networks. These are intangible things which people need, communities need in order to adapt. And you talk about learning, how people can learn about climate change, because knowledge is very crucial. What do they learn about climate change? And that leads to the last aspect, talking about agents, which activates these domains. It's the power and freedom with which you have in order to respond in adapting to climate change. So this respond in adapting to climate change. So these 5 aspects give me a very good framing with which I would be examining my work. It's in progress, and I wouldn't say I'm there yet, but it would speak to almost any aspects in low-income contexts, in coastal communities, which we will be talking about. Now, coming to the project, which it's ongoing. We started like the last quarter of last year, and the broad idea is to have full production of knowledge. So it's not just producing knowledge for knowledge's sake, but something that is more usable to the different stakeholders involved in this adaptation issue. So it's something behind the methods we're proposing, the methods we're using, tools, coming to the surveys, coming to the stakeholder engagements, the workshops, the policy dialogues, coming to the advocacy, and even data logging to have some empirical evidence of climate change, climate parameters at a small scale. So these are the various methods in line with the transdisciplinary approach. So it's not just about producing knowledge in our silo as academics, but getting to produce knowledge in actors, and in that course, naturally, making this knowledge useful for them, and of course, useful as academics as well. So I'll be speaking on 3 areas where I'm working together with other people. It's a settlement in Lagos, in a rural context in Ondo State, completely waterfront settlement. And then I'll talk about the small town where we had a workshop, which was a context for a workshop, and some of the ideas we're trying to bounce off in terms of adapting to climate change in the built environment. So, idea of a settlement, some might not know it as idea of a settlement, is located in Lagos, just by the lagoon. The lagoon is to your right, and then my yellow line is I would use the word a draft demarcation of the area. Some would call it a slum, irrespective of the terminology. It was established about 35 years ago mostly by migrant fishermen from Ondo State, from the coastal area. So some of them moved to Lagos to continue their fishing business or to look for other sorts of livelihoods. And most of them settled in this area. So it's close to the lagoon. Some of the buildings are on stilts. And the place was sand-filled, because these are information I got from the residents. Maybe just to talk about the methodology, I have interviewed over 12 people, and all of them have spent not less than 12 years in the settlement, so to more than 20 years. So I have talked to people who have a lot of memory about the space. So the settlement was sand-filled. Normally, you can see the patches of greenery just coming towards the lagoon. That used to be people looking for accommodation, and the landowners trying to sell. Sold the lands to them, and they filled up the space by dredging the lagoon and creating the space, landed space for them to live. So, as I already mentioned, there are links to the coastal areas, And as I already mentioned, there are links to the coastal areas, and there are not less than 2,000 households in the settlement, although like general, like non-formal settlements, generally, statistics are really not available. Official statistics are not available. But the university who did a profiling as part of his project, and from there I realized that there were not less than 2,000 households in the area, and infrastructure is poor, services are absent, and there is relative poverty. I use the word relative poverty because of some of the residents I met, considering the level of education and what would be their total income. I wouldn't classify them as poor, which also brings the debate around informal settlements as transitory spaces. So you find people who just they're investing their resources somewhere else, not minding the conditions in those spaces. So I wouldn't really classify it as a space of absolute poverty, but a space where there is relative poverty. Now, based on the interviews I've conducted and my engagements with stakeholders, their responses in terms of perception and climate change in the 4 areas. On rainfall, yes, they agree that rainfall patterns are changing, volumes of precipitation are increasing, and they told me there is a 3 to 4 year cycle of flooding. So last year it flooded. They said the last time it flooded was 3-4 years ago. So they anticipated, and these are people who are living there for over 30 years. They know every 3-4 years it's going to flood. I mean, not the normal flash flooding when it rains, but every flooding. They've understood the 3-4 year cycle. So I've not been able to talk to meteorologists to understand the science behind the 3-4 year cycle of flooding in the settlement, but I found it consistently mentioned by almost all the people I interviewed that it's going to flood in the next 3 years, in the next 4 years. Sea level rise, they do not agree that the sea level is rising. In fact, because it's some of the spaces, the sand field, so they even feel, yes, they're now above the sea level, but that's their perception too. In terms of temperature, they do not agree that temperature is increasing in relation to climate. change. They think it's because we no more have trees, we are building next to each other, we are developing our spaces. That's why temperature is increasing. Yes, it's urbanization, and that's what it means, because you now have more concrete, more people, higher temperatures. In terms of windstorm, they do not think there is any significant increase in the speed of winds or direction of winds. Generally, windstorms are associated with the rains, but they do not think there's anything different considering the time they've spent there. Yes, considering the time they've spent there. Yes, in terms of the impacts of climates in the area, I could identify heat-related impacts on the health, heat rashes, and then waterborne sicknesses, I've forgotten the name which they call it, but it's having like something caught to your toes because it's flooded everywhere, it's waterlogged. You move inside water, you at times live inside water, so it affects. I will talk about that. Talking about livelihoods, yes, there is disruption of livelihoods in the settlement whenever it floods. So someone who makes bricks for people to build will not be able to spread these bricks because it needs dry ground for production of bricks. So you have to hold the reconstruction of damaged houses, which is in itself a business and a source of livelihood. You have carpenters there, and they get more work when your roofs are blown off, or the bricklayers who have more to do when you need to raise the height of your house. So reconstruction is also a form of business, which creates a livelihood. So you disrupt the livelihood, you're also trying to create a livelihood in that case. In terms of the natural ecosystem, yes, aquatic life is affected. I met a fisherman who says, oh, with the rains, it's good for him because he's going to have more fishes while he goes out. Although he admits it's also bad because he knows he's going to have a problem in his house. But he would, from his account, his perception, with the rise in sea level, there would be more fishes coming out. Creates that environment for disease vectors to thrive, for them to breed, and for them to thrive. As you would see in some of the pictures, that these are, if I would use Nigerian parlance, the headquarters of mosquitoes, because that is where they breed. And but some of the rest, we're stronger. We're not affected by this. Don't compare with people living on the island, like the high upmarket areas. Like, we're strong, we live here, and nothing happens to us. And then another point is salinity, because of increase in rise in the sea level. The salt content in water and in the soil increases, and this is bad for farming because they cannot plant anything with ice salt content in the soil. So some of them have reported attempts to plant, but it's a lot of increasing salinity. So damage to buildings. These are just pictures to show you what happened. These pictures are from, I think, November, December last year, when the rains have subsided. So I wasn't there when it was really, really raining. So I wasn't there when it was really, really raining, when it was really, really flooding. So this just shows you what has happened after the rains have gone. But what do they also do to cope with this? Raised foundation. So someone is building a house, the foundation goes very high. The general trend is to raise your house. So you would remove your roof, and then you will have like 2 layers of bricks, 2 course of bricks. Then you put the roof, and then you raise your floor. So with that, you can protect yourself against flooding coming in the next year. Against flooding coming in the next year, if it's the 3-4 year cycle. So this is also closing off his balcony because of the rains, because of the flooding, and you find people using a lot of scrap materials, which is wrong, trying to create stable ground around the house. People trying to put rubble in the house so that they can just raise the floor, because some of them most don't have the resources to use durable materials and strong materials. So coming to some of the coping strategies that are not just about buildings, there is a lot of support from families. You rely strongly on your family when disaster strikes or when there is a problem. And there's something they do. I mean, all sort of practices are passed down to children, or things they do in order to cope. For example, when it's flooding, and you know that because of the rain, there's sort of a material you have to use. Maybe you put salt. When you get home, you pour salty water on your legs so that it sort of, I would say, disinfects your legs from any form of bacteria trying to attack your leg or whatever organism. And then social network is very, very strong, especially from the churches and some other groups. There are lots of churches in the space, and there are sources of support in the space, and there are sources of support for the residents, awareness, and also external support from NGOs and some charity organizations. So you have church organizations who have a charity arm also doing some work in the settlement, apart from NGOs who come to do like training to empower the people. And these are more general. I wouldn't say they're team because of climate change, but more of let's make the environment better, let's create infrastructure. So they reported a training on how to have solar, create solar as a source of energy, and they were able to install some street lights. Solar as a source of energy, and they were able to install some street lights. So all sort of support, which one way or the other bounces off on the climate issue, but not directly deemed as climate change adaptation in the community. So I'll move to the next place, which is a rural community in Ilaje local government. This is a very, very interesting case because this area was established in 1946. The story we heard was that there were some apostles and evangelists who were not missionaries, Nigerians, who were preaching the gospel, going around, and killing of twins was practiced. So they were against the killing of twins. Then they were persecuted. Then we learned that in January 1946, by divine instruction, they had to move to a virgin land, an island close to the sea, to settle. An island close to the sea to settle about 70 of them who were persecuted and sort of hated because of their stand against killing of the twins. So they moved into this space and established a quasi-communist life, initially patterned after everybody having things, and it was theocratic, no form of state intervention, and it was officially recognized. A lot of people visited, a lot of tourists trying to see this kind of community with this strange social life. So everything was in common. You don't own a land by yourself. If you need to build, you apply to the palace, and once you've gotten some materials, then the palace will supply additional materials, and then you will build. But over the decades, that of course has changed, because apart from having everything I think for the first 2 decades, it worked well. They had everything in common. You might not even know. Someone was telling me you can't even know your kid. Every kid is yours. So you can't even say this is mine, this is my property, this is my house. But at some point the system shifted that you retain a percentage for yourself, you send a percentage to relating in the community. So everyone has something, irrespective of what that is. And of course, the value education. As I learned, one of the leaders of the 70 people who founded the settlement had some training in Russia, which was then, so he really took up the idea of communism, but not the pure communism, which you had in Russia then. Now, over the decades, the settlement had grown. The area has been noted for a lot of high literacy rates, They had an independent power plant, which was the first in the country, and they had the first technical training college in the country, because there's a lot of value in education. So it was such very unique system. The settlement is one of the strong areas where the evidences of climate change are palpable. When I use the word palpable, you can really see that something is a problem. Before I'll talk about the sea level rise, I'll show you this picture. The sea level rise, I'll show you this picture. This is the picture of the palace then in black and white. I want you to take note of the ground level, and this is the picture of the palace now that it's flooding. And this is a picture of the palace. I think you see that it's been submerged. It's been submerged just because of these changes happening. So as you would see in the map I've shown, the pattern is linear just along the Atlantic Ocean, and it's not accessible by road. You have to go by boat. To enter the settlement, and sea surge, sea incursion, all that you would have there. But some GIS experts estimated that with 1 meter sea level rise, 4.71% of the old settlement will be lost to the sea. With 2 meters, 12.68% will be lost to the sea. So it's something that calls for great concern. In fact, this is happening. This is already happening in the area. These are pictures of flooding. This was from October, and rain had subsided then. when this picture came. So you can see the stilts. Okay, I didn't mention that they live on stilts. It's a wood called ironwood, which they get from the forest, very strong, can last 150 years inside water. So they construct with that. But notwithstanding how durable your timber structure can be, the sea wouldn't let it be. The sea is coming, and then these houses are falling off. This 2019 experience. So over time, as the sea progresses, as the incursion comes with violence, with speed, the houses are being removed and being cleared, which is a big problem. Flooding here, this is a classroom which was flooded because of the rain, because of the value on education. They have a school, but the floods wouldn't let it be in a good condition. But notwithstanding, I'm not sure if I'm going to show it later, they raised the floor in the class, so they just raised even with the flooding taking place. I think the people have just come to accept it and to live with water. So if you can move out of the settlement, if you can go somewhere else, just accept it and live with the water. You can see this is a bakery. They've just raised the machine. This is a tank. You can see the metal tank, the plastic tank. Even the guy in the bakery is just sitting down with his boot. So it's like, this is just what's happening. And because of the kind of social system in the community, the cultural values, the practices, it's very different in the community. The cultural values, the practices, it's very difficult for people to just change. Yes, I wouldn't say change is not taking place, but that social values are strong, that change is a very, it's something that takes time, that will take time. These are the streets now. Yes, there is water, the plants gives you the way, and remember, it's not accessible by road, so they don't even need cars. They don't need cars in order to move around in the space. It's just your boat. Once you have your boat, then you're fine. So you move on the streets. So you move on the streets, and then you go to your house, you raise your floor, you live with the water, you sleep with the water, you raise your bed. Once the rain subsides, then you can bring your stuffs down on the ground, to the ground. Yes, there has been concern for intervention. We've heard of proposals to have an embankment close to the sea, just to prevent the surge and the incursion from coming into settlement. But it has its challenges and the technical and political issues around such moves, because that's something that has to happen through the state. Talk about the workshop we had in Igbokoda, which is a town, now not just a small area like Ayetoro, or small area within a big city like Lagos, but here is also coastal. Ideally, the workshop as part of the project, we could have gone to Ayetoro, which is the settlement, but I don't want people to be lost in the sea in my name, because we have to go by boat, and you find that people who have never been on the sea, they may not be able to live. So because we had architects and planners, young professionals who were invited to participate in the workshop, but I just said I can't take them to a place where we can't drive into, because it would be a problem. Myself, when I visited, I had my frights because I have not been used to living under such space. So we had to choose a neighborhood which is also on the waterfront in Igbokoda town to serve as a context for our workshop. Ilaje local government is in Ondo State, and Ondo State is a littoral state. It contains 180 kilometers. It contains 180 kilometers of coastline, and that's the largest for the country. Of the 852, the remaining are shared by different states. So it's very significant when you talk about the coastal economy and things like that. So we choose as apparent, and then the dwellings are flimsy, which could represent a slum within the city, informal settlement, and we took the participant, about 26 participant architects and planners to engage with stakeholders. We also had people working with government who joined us to engage with stakeholders. We also had people working with government who joined us to engage with stakeholders in the community to understand the context, the challenges, and the problems. Flooding is a big challenge here. This workshop was in December, so it's dry. But the man who owns this house in Green said the house was constructed it on stilts. They consider that, okay, the next two houses, pictures are not showing it, were constructed long ago, I think maybe over 20 years ago. But at some point with flooding, the water came into the house. So when they were constructing the house less than 5 years ago, they said we are going to raise it. Less than 5 years ago, they said we are going to raise it much more than those ones. But when the rains came last year, it came into the house. So the water went right above the height of the stilt, which really shows the extent of the flooding challenge in that context. So we try to add the problems, what are the challenges, what are the options, and students, designers worked together, came up with some of the solutions. I think I would show a video here of what one of the groups proposed. Okay. Yeah, it's quite architectural, but it was born out of the desire to create a better environment for people in the settlement. Okay, even without the audio, let's just. Sorry. Yeah. No. I need the video is not done. They're not done. Yeah, that's it. No, I need the video. About the audio is just music. Okay. Okay, so the basic idea from this group is that they want a building that rises with the water. So as the sea level rises, the building can float, and then once the level goes down, it recedes, the building can also go down. So it's essentially a floating. One of the videos gives you an idea when it shows when it's raining, and then the level of the water is rising and how that's will be handled. But because of time, so we had a presentation involving some of the stakeholders, and this led. Okay, these are some of the. And they had other strategies apart from just building, how you can use waste to support the construction or the management of the spaces, and then how to produce energy from sewage, because being on water, sewage is a big challenge. How to handle sewage, and then recycling. But our reflection on the workshop in collaboration with the stakeholders, people from government and some professionals present, was, yes, it's exposed the participant to a new context, because I would say not so many people are used to the coastal context. And this is a very significant area of the country, because most of the oil wells from which Nigeria derives a significant revenue are located in the coastal areas. So this really deserves a lot of attention and makes them always on the radar when it comes to the issue of providing services for the people, and also considering impacts of oil exploration on coast communities. And these are always coastal communities. And then deepening their engagement with stakeholders, but with the proposals were not well grounded in the state's policy and plan, if there are any, for the coastal areas. And then some of the solutions were high-tech, and considering the income level in these areas, the relative poverty, some of those things would have to be revised in terms of cost. And also some of them need capacitation in the community for it to be taken up. So I'll go back to this domains of adaptation, and wrapping up and making sense of what I'm doing and all I've been saying is that how can we increase capacity across these domains and interlink it, because they are essentially interlinked, so that communities not just would have assets, because some of adaptation programs or projects of views seems to be narrow, considering assets. How can we just grow the assets? But it's more than just the assets. The agency is also important. The learning is also important. The existing low-income communities, but needs to be strengthened, and then the idea of flexibility. So this is the domain I'm really looking forward to keep extracting what we're doing, so that at the end, adaptation capacity within these communities increase, and then climate change is not. So thank you. That's where I'm going.